Good morning, welcome back to the vlog. So I just got to the gym and I am not at all done with my pre-workout. So I'm just gonna sit here and sip on it. So for today's vlog, I'm just gonna go through a day in my life as someone who works remote in tech. And I'm also gonna share some tips about how to break into tech and just some general job advice that I got when I was searching for my first job, because I know it's like kind of difficult for people who are job searching right now. The market is not great. But anyways, I'll talk about all of that later in this vlog. For now, I need to finish my pre-workout and then hustle into the gym and get my workout done because I'm running a little later than usual since I was trying to film this video. Stay tuned to see the rest of my life and to hear a few tips on how you can break into tech and land that first job.
Subject, acting like it's nothing. Know you wanna talk, but something got you stuck in. Could it be the way that I walk?
So now we'll go into the portion of the video that I feel like most people are interested in, which is how I personally got into tech and the tips that I have for people who want to get into tech. A little bit more about my journey in general. Back when I was in high school, I was part of a program called Girls Who Code, and that's where I learned how to code. So I have a little bit of those skills. And then I went into college as a computer science major with like full intentions of becoming a software engineer while I was in school. But that ended up changing. And as you know, a lot of people who go to college end up changing their major. And I thought that that would never happen to me. And I ended up switching my major. So I basically got really involved with like a lot of extracurricular activities in school. And I was working at least 3 jobs at a time. So I was like an RA, an orientation leader. I was in Associated Students, or like student government, for like our entire university. I just did a bunch of stuff, and I was like, I really like leading people and working with people. Whenever I go into my computer science classes, there's definitely a stereotype of like the types of people who become engineers, and they're not as like outgoing or like want to socialize with you most of the time. So it's kind of tricky for me because when I'd have labs and I'd have to like partner with people that I'm like fully engaged trying to talk to them, and they're just like, don't bother me. And I was like, this is not a good time for me. But I ended up getting through the first 3 years of school with my computer science degree, and then it got into like the upper division, more complex classes. And I was so swamped with all the work that I was doing because I was part of so many orgs and like just doing so many things that I didn't have the time to dedicate to like coding all day and like building all these different projects that I needed to for my upper division classes. So that kind of stressed me out. And I also was like, is this what I want to do? Like, I really like working with people, so I don't know if this is for me anymore. So I ended up switching majors to business administration with a concentration in management information systems, and it's a mouthful. It was basically like a mixture of business and tech, which was perfect for me because I already had like all the coding skills. So like any of the classes where I had to code was easy peasy for me since I was doing much harder code in my computer science classes. And then the business classes, like obviously compared to the science classes that I had to take and like the math classes, like I was taking like linear algebra, and then I did like Calc 3 and stuff, and I really love math, so like for me it was just fun. Switching over to business was very easy, to be honest. So I like wasn't really studying a lot. I had more time to focus on all the jobs that I was doing, so it worked out really well for me. Anyways, rounding about the conversation about my college experience, I ended up not going into software engineering right out of school. While I was in school, I had a couple of internships. So I had one at an executive recruiting firm, and then I interned at a very large cybersecurity company. I think that really helped me get into my role now, and I'll go into that a little bit more later. That's just my background. Now, going into the tips that I have for you if you're trying to go into tech. The first one is gaining skills, and being able to prove that you can use those skills is the most important thing. All that we see like on LinkedIn nowadays is that companies claim that they're gonna hire entry level with people who have 0 to like 2 years of experience, and then they end up hiring people that have like 3 to 4, or sometimes the listings are more like blunt about it, and then they say entry level, but they're looking for someone with at least 3 years of experience. I think that being able to build those skills in a non-classroom setting is super important. So whether it is getting jobs that demonstrate those certain skills, or like a certification that can demonstrate that, or an internship, those are really big ones. If you're looking into coding specifically and you're not in a computer science or a software engineering major, then I would recommend doing like a coding boot camp, because you'll do a bunch of projects there and people will help you with the interview process and whatnot. I have a lot of coworkers who are software engineers who went through a coding boot camp, and they weren't computer science or software engineering majors in college, so that worked out perfectly for them. They're like great engineers, so that is also one way that you could do it. I think the main point there is that if you don't have transferable skills, you're not going to get an interview, because the company isn't going to know if you actually can practice the skills that you learned in school in like a real world setting. I think some of the biggest skills that you would get from a work setting versus a classroom setting is soft skills, and that is like impossible to prove on a resume if you haven't had a job before and someone can advocate for you on those different skills. For example, like time management, having like a growth mindset, being able to navigate through conflicts. All that stuff is like so important once you're in a work setting. My second tip is just trying to figure out how to weasel your way in. Honestly, getting into tech is a little bit tricky if you don't have a technical background, but I know a lot of people who went from a higher education background and they ended up going into tech. If you can't land something right away, just weaseling your way in is going to be really helpful to you down the line. So for example, my internship at the executive recruiting firm wasn't necessarily in tech, but the companies that the recruiting firm was working with were all tech companies and like Fortune 500. So I knew that even though I wasn't going to be directly in tech, I'm still going to be working with companies that are in tech, so I can at least learn more about like the business from a different standpoint that's like slightly closer to where I was before. Because when I was a student, then like I had no idea how the business worked at all, but being in that internship, I not only gained skills in the role, and though it wasn't necessarily applicable to what I went into later on, I was able to familiarize myself with the different companies and like their ways of working, and just like gained more insight and background knowledge on how the tech world works. So I think that really helped me later on. And then also, since we were working with those tech companies, I was able to put on my resume that I was working with Fortune 500 companies that are like in high tech growth, something like that, where I had like keywords I can put in my resume that I knew would help me down the line. So that job specifically wasn't necessarily in tech, but I think it was like a good stepping stone for me to then get my next internship, which was my transition into tech afterwards. My next tip would just be to try to talk to as many people as you can who are in tech. And this goes for people who aren't sure of like what area that they want to work in. When you're early on in your career, like you're not gonna find the most perfect job for you. And if you do, like all props to you, but I think most people are kind of like in this process of like, oh, I think I like this, and you're like, oh, I don't like that. And you're just like flipping back and forth trying to figure out what you want to do. I would recommend like reaching out to people on LinkedIn and seeing if anybody's like willing to get on a call with you just to talk about like their day-to-day. And then you can see from there if that's something you would enjoy doing, because if you hear their day-to-day and you're like, I would absolutely hate that, now you know not to waste your time applying for these roles. And then once you know that, you can spend more time learning about a different role and then gaining skills in that specific role, so that when you're job searching, you have the skill set, you have at least a little bit of an understanding of what that job looks like day-to-day, so that when you do get the job, you know that you're not gonna hate your day-to-day. So I would recommend just like chatting with people here and there to learn more. My fourth tip is that the market is very difficult right now. I feel like it's been very difficult for a really long time. I got my role when it was COVID, which was really hard. Like, it was so hard to find a job back then. I was in a phase where I was just getting desperate to find work, and I was applying to a lot of sales roles, and I know I like hate sales, but I was like, I don't have a job and I don't know what else to do. And then I ended up almost working at like a solar panel company selling solar panels, and I don't know anything about that, and I do not care about solar panels because I don't own a house, so just being transparent. But the market just has not been good, from COVID to like all the tech layoffs to just like the recession, or like, I don't know, we've been in a recession for like years now. I don't know what the deal is, but we're past the days of like the dot-com boom where like tech was thriving and everybody was like throwing their money everywhere and everybody was paid like insane amounts of money. But my biggest piece of advice is don't feel discouraged when you're going through this process. I applied to, I think it was between 300 to 400 jobs before I landed the one that I'm in right now. And you're gonna get a ton of no's before you get a yes. And all that matters is that one yes that ends up working out for you. The process is really tricky, and a lot of companies just end up like ghosting you. It's just really demoralizing when like you just keep getting rejection emails, or like companies ghost you after a couple interviews. That's happened to me a couple times before. But at the end of the day, what I always told myself too when I did get rejections was like, everything in life, or like everything that I'm thinking about right now, like relationships, friendships, all that stuff is a two-way street. And the same goes for your job, because you have to want your company and that job, and your company also has to want you. Because like if you really, really want a role and you think it's perfect for you, but then the company's like, oh, I don't think you're the best fit, like why would you want to work for someone who doesn't see the value in you? And that's always something that I think about when stuff doesn't work out. When I was in the phase of like looking for internships and stuff, I remember there was this one really big company that I got really far into the interview process with, and then I kind of was just like stuck on the fact that I was going to intern for them over the summer, because I went through like 3 different interviews and they all went really well. And then in the end, I ended up getting rejected. And I was so sad because I was like, this was the perfect thing for me, blah, blah, blah. But then at the end of the day, I was like, do I even want to be in a place where I'm not valued? And then after that, I was like, I would rather keep searching for an opportunity where they're really excited to have me there, so that we're both in a situation where I'm happy to be here and you're happy to have me, versus trying to force a relationship with a company, which is like the same as like forcing relationships with people. It just like doesn't work. So if you put that into perspective when you're job searching, I think it really helps you get through the process as well. My next tip is specifically for after you land yourself an interview. Once you finally start getting interviews, that's really your chance to shine and try to make things happen. Because applying is so easy. You're just throwing your resume everywhere. At least that's what I was doing. I was just like quick applying to everything. And then once I finally got an interview, I was like, okay, it's time to crack down on this and like study as much as I can. And I know people who went into their interviews unprepared. And I was like, this is your one shot to like get your life together, basically, because like this is like your livelihood and your future on the line. When I was job searching, when the market is rough too, you're probably not getting a ton of interviews, so you have time to like study the job description and like study up on questions and like rehearse everything. So I would just recommend doing that. What I specifically did was I'd go back to the job posting immediately after they told me I was getting an interview. And then I try to catch it before like they remove the posting, or like just try to find it from any source where I can save a PDF version of the job posting. And then I'll like highlight key things that I can talk about during my interview, or come up with questions that might apply to the things that they're looking for in that role. So I would mark that up on the PDF viewer on my Mac and then like annotate it on the side. I would also go on Glassdoor and look up like questions that are asked for that specific role that you're applying for, because a lot of people tend to leave reviews after they have a good or a bad interview. And one of the questions that Glassdoor asks is, what are the questions that you were asked in the interview? And people will offer a handful, and you can just like copy and paste those into your own doc, and then you can formulate an answer and like think of the best ways that you can showcase yourself with that answer, and then you'll have that prepared already when you're asked the question in the interview. A question I feel like is asked all the time is like, oh, like talk about when you had a conflict and how you tried to resolve it. I personally just find it difficult if I have to think of an answer for that like on the spot and I don't have like any ideas that come to mind immediately. Especially because like your interview block is like 30 minutes or an hour, and it's like we can't spend like 10 minutes trying to figure out that one time I really handled a situation like that really well. So if you have that at hand and you're able to like deliver that quickly, and the interviewee can be like, oh wow, that's a great example. next question. Like, it really just helps your interview process go really smoothly. Another thing I think is important is just looking up like behavioral questions that are like typically asked for that specific role. Like, for example, if you're interviewing for a sales role, just look up for something like sales role interview questions, and that will probably steer you in the right direction for the types of questions that you're going to be asked. It might not be like the exact ones that the interviewer is gonna ask you, but it'll at least start getting the gears going, and then you can try to like predict what might be asked of you. I would much rather be over-prepared than under-prepared when I'm going through the interview process. And the biggest thing for this one is just like practice, practice, practice. And by practice, I don't mean like memorize all your answers word for word, but like know them well enough that when you're asked, you know which certain like points that you need to hit in order to get your point across. And you don't want to sound too robotic too. You want the conversation to flow and be natural, because if it sounds like you're just reading off a piece of paper, it's obvious. And even though I'm not a recruiter, like I don't think someone would be very pleased with hiring someone that had like the perfect answers, but their answers sounded very robotic, because it's like in a normal setting, you're probably not going to approach things in that way. So they want to see like a genuine side of you. If you're faking yourself through the interview process and they love you, then it's going to be like they love that fake version of you that you put out, versus if you're like being your genuine self and they really like that, then it's going to be easy for you to transition into that company, because it's like the person that you put out during the interview process is who they're expecting to join. And if that was your genuine self, perfect. They already know what they're walking into. Just always bear that in mind.
I'm a butter rose. Yeah, you should have already known I'm not the mother dudes. And then, might get me coming for your spot, don't get too comfortable.